and the Fortress needed every bit of power to drag aloft its typical bomb load of 14 500-pound bombs over a distance of 3,600 miles. Top speed was about 290 miles per hour, but in tight formations and heavily loaded, the Boeing cruised at about 170. With its heavy defensive armament of 13 machine guns, the Air Corps believed that the B-17 could successfully fight off enemy interceptors without help from escorting fighters. This was a major issue as the Air Corps didn't have any fighter aircraft capable of flying long distances with the bombers. But since the Flying Fortress had so many 50 and 30 caliber machine guns, such a long-range escort fighter seemed unnecessary. The B-17s would strike their targets alone, flying in tight, mutually protecting formations. In 1943, the 8th Air Force unleashed its first sustained bombing campaign against Germany. Codenamed Operation Point Blank, the B-17s were sent to knock out the Third Reich's aircraft industry. By destroying the Luftwaffe's production centers, the 8th Air Force would gain control of the air over Europe. With that in hand, the bombers could be sent against other strategic targets, striking at the heart of the Reich's ability to wage war. Point Blank was the first clash between the American pre-war doctrine and the realities of modern air combat. The results were soon clear, but the Americans doggedly persisted in putting their theories into practice at the expense of thousands of brave young men.
About the time we dropped the bombs, we started getting hit real close. One engine got a hit, started losing oil, waited till there was not enough oil pressure. They couldn't feather the engine. So then they windmill just from the air. And eventually they may twist the shaft off and the prop will come off. God knows where it'll go. Or they can shake a wing loose, I guess. Not a very good situation. And I don't remember if it was in that engine or another one, the fire started. I don't know if they got that one out or not. And apparently the underside of the 17 was pretty well shot up. Sort of dropped out of the formation and started losing altitude. And wasn't too long till the pilot rang the bailout bell. And that was it for that mission.
The most important flaw in the precision daylight bombing campaign was the lack of a long-range escort fighter. Even the B-17's numerous defensive guns could not protect it from determined German fighter attack. The Luftwaffe soon learned to hit the B-17 formations from the front, which proved to be the weak point in the Boeing's defensive systems. Sometimes 40 or 50 Me-109s or FW-190s would swoop down at the bombers in a blazing head-on pass, aiming for the cockpit and engines. Nothing could stop such devastating attacks, and the Fortresses took appalling losses.
Our biggest concern, really, in all honesty, were the young men that were over there before I got there. They had a lot of fighters that they had to contend with. The average mission completions that they had, I think, was about 7. And here we finished 35, so that tells you something right there.
If you lost an engine, or if you feathered an engine, that was very apparent to the Germans. And they'd pick on you right now. And they like to make holes in a formation. If they could knock a plane out of formation, you were definitely crippled. They knew how to do that.
Without long-range fighter escorts, the 8th Air Force's B-17 groups lost 40% of their crews during 1943. Only a quarter of the bomb crews were able to fly a full tour, 25 missions, and go home that year. An average crew flew 5 to 7 missions before getting shot down. Some who flew longer usually came home more than once with a shot-up bomber and injured crewmen aboard. Randall Jarrell, an 8th Air Force airman, wrote a poem that captured all the horror and intensity he and his fellow Flying Fortress crews faced in a piece titled "The Death of a Ball Turret Gun." From my mother's sleep, I fell into the state, and I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from Earth, loosed from its dream of life, I woke to black flak and the nightmare fighters. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose. Such losses had a profound effect on morale and on the emotional health of the remaining B-17 crews. With buddies going down on every mission, the men became fatalistic. They clung to good luck charms and became increasingly superstitious. Others gradually lost their combat edge as battle exhaustion wore them out. In some cases, men broke down entirely and became psychiatric casualties. About 4% of all 8th Air Force losses in World War II were psychiatric cases. These were men who performed their duty admirably till the stress and strain of constant combat finally broke their emotional back. Such men were called flak happy by their peers, or said to have the Focke-Wulf jitters.
During the war, the 8th Air Force suffered roughly 50,000 KIA, WIA, and MIA. Tremendous amount of guys lost their lives or were physically injured. But also, as the stress and strain of combat began to manifest themselves on these crews, it became clear that the 8th Air Force was going to have to do something about psychiatric casualties. They were starting to lose crews, starting to lose pilots, starting to lose gunners to emotional trauma. And so one of the things that the 8th Air Force did was they set up a series of rest homes for crews that had been through particularly horrendous ordeals. Or later on in the war, they were sent there just as a matter of course. These were called flak leaves, and they'd go back to these country manors way out of the way from any military installations, and they would be able to eat and relax, and that actually helped get some of the emotional problems that the crews were suffering under control. Now, this never threatened operations for the 8th Air Force. It was always a very small number of the crews. Wartime reports had it that of every 1,000 men that flew combat with the 8th Air Force, 42 were going to become psychiatric casualties of one sort or another. And they were called permanent psychiatric cases if they were not returned to flight duty within 15 days. During the war, about 4,000 airmen and pilots fell into this category.
Through these brutal months, the crews learned to love their B-17s. The Flying Fortress had a ruggedness that sometimes defied imagination. They came home with 2, sometimes 3 engines knocked out and great gaping holes torn in their aluminum skins. Controls shot away, landing gear ruined, hydraulics blown out, flaps gone, and chunks of wing or tail hacked out by cannon shells didn't stop the rugged Flying Fortress. They came home limping, shattered and ruined.